Do you struggle with knowing what lures to throw when the water gets cold? Well, in today's video, I'm going to share with you my top 4 cold water smallmouth lures to help you catch more fish. Let's dive into this thing. For some reason this year, it feels like the water temps went from that mid 70-degree range down into the 50s very, very quickly. These fish really didn't have a stable period where you had that phenomenal fall bite. I only had a couple days where I had success really going out and cranking for smallmouth, which is one of my favorite ways to catch them. And now our water temps, especially out on the Great Lakes, are right at 50 degrees and below. So these fish are moving into their wintertime patterns. So in today's video, I'm going to share with you my top 4 cold water lures for when that water gets to 50 degrees or below to help you catch more fish. Now, all the baits I'm going to be talking about in today's video are going to be linked to Omnia website. If you guys have never shopped at Omnia before, I have a code for you guys to use to save 15% on your order. That's going to be linked down in the description below, so go check that out. Use that code and it's going to save you 15% when you're picking out some wintertime fishing lures. Now, in today's video, I'm not only going to be talking about the baits, but also about why I'm choosing the presentations that I'm using so that you can have success when you get on the water with these techniques. It's not just glossing over like, hey, these are my top 4 lures. I'm going to try and dive in a little bit deeper to give you some understanding of where and when I'm throwing each of these baits. So the first bait that I want to talk about is my favorite way to catch ultra cold water fish. When that water temp is below 50 degrees, a blade bait is going to be the first technique that I pick up. And I've done a ton of videos on this, on how to fish it, where to fish it, and just gone out and smashed a lot of big fish on this. So if you guys want to check out some of those videos, you can look them up. But a blade is a really, really effective tool to catch cold water bass. As opposed to these other techniques that I'm fishing, which has a pretty much do-nothing action, a blade actually has a really, really tight vibration when you lift and drop this bait along bottom. Now, one of the benefits of that is you can trigger fish to come over to this and inspect the bait from long distances. They can feel that vibration with their lateral line, and even though they're lethargic, it will trigger some of those violent bites that you get all year. Now, while it does look like a lipless crankbait with that narrow body profile, I'm actually fishing this bait down along the bottom. So I make a long cast away from the boat, I let it sink to the bottom, and then I use short lifts and drags. And I just want to barely feel this bait lift off the bottom. So basically what it does, when it hits bottom, it lays down on its side, then you lift it up and it vibrates, and then you set it back down. Lift it up, vibrates, and you set it back down. With those short hops, you can draw fish to this bait, and you get incredibly violent bites. They'll eat this bait so deep that you have to pull it out of them with pliers. But it's a very effective way to catch and get reaction bites from cold water fish. So when I'm picking apart an area for the first time, especially when that water is cold, a blade bait is going to be one of my first go-to techniques. Now this one here is made by my buddy Aaron Diddy from Lake Erie Lure Works, so I'll have that link down below as well as a couple of different options from Omnia Fishing. The rod that I'm throwing that on is actually a brand new rod from TFO. It's the Taction Bass series. It's a 7.4 medium moderate fast. It was actually designed for small swim baits. What makes this so good is that moderate fast action. So when you hook those fish on those little number 6 or number 8 treble hooks, you can keep them pinned a lot better with this moderate fast action rod. It bends deeper in the blank and helps you land a lot more of those fish. A lot of guys fish a blade on a bait casting setup. It's 5/8 of an ounce, but with this rod right here, you will hook and land a lot more of those bass. This is something I figured out a handful of years ago. My buddy Nathan taught me this. Fishing it on a spinning rod allows you to get more action out of the bait, and it also helps you pick up more of those bites and land more of those fish. Then I'm fishing it on a 3,000 size spinning reel with 8 or 10 pound test braided line to 8 or 10 pound test fluorocarbon. Technique number 2 is going to be really no surprise to most people that watch this channel, but it is a finesse jig. Now, a finesse jig for me has become a staple in my boat pretty much all year long, but it catches wintertime fish really, really effectively. I think the reason for this is that it triggers reaction strikes from fish as it falls through the water column, but it also catches them really effectively dragged along the bottom. The size that I'm typically fishing is a 1/2 ounce. I've also mixed in a 3/8 ounce depending on how deep I'm fishing and how fast I want that bait to fall, but it's a Beast Coast OW Sniper jig. Now this is their tungsten model, but they also just released a metal compound, which is only $3.99 for an OW Sniper, which is really, really hard to come by. Same hook, same components. almost the same head size. And then the trailer that I like to fish on the bait, especially in really cold water, is a do nothing style trailer. This is a Duo Realis Wriggle ND. Has very, very little action, maybe a tiny tail shimmy as that bait falls, but it will stand up off the back because it's made of that same elastomer style plastic that is very, very buoyant. So it really has minimal action. You can fish it with small hops or drags along bottom, and this is a bait that's really, really good at triggering reaction strikes from fish that are maybe suspended up off bottom a little bit, or those fish that are keyed in on gobies or crawdads right along the bottom. So for me, a finesse jig is a go-to pretty much all year, but really, really gets picked up a lot, especially as that water cools down. Then the rod that I'm throwing that on is also a spinning setup, and the reason I go to a spinning rod for this during the winter time is basically having those bigger guides that aren't going to ice up quite as bad, but also you get a lot better feel and you can cause that bait to fall a lot more quickly on that lighter line, which is a big deal, and rate of fall is a big factor, especially during those colder water months. But it is a TFO Professional Series 7.6 medium heavy. It's a little bit longer rod, but that medium heavy really gives you the backbone and the power you need to drive that hook home at the end of a long cast. And then I'm fishing it with just your standard 20 or 25 series spinning reel. I believe this is 12-pound test braided line to 8 or 10-pound test fluorocarbon. So overall, the setup's not really crazy, but that finesse jig is just a really, really great way to trigger reaction bites from fish that are looking at it come through the column. And a lot of those bites either come right on the fall or immediately after that bait hits bottom. Now, bait number 3 is one of the first cold water techniques that I ever used, and that is finesse swim baiting. Picking up a 2.5 to 4 inch finesse style swim bait like the Beast Coast Slow Flow and fished either mid-column or along bottom. And one of the biggest things about fishing a finesse swim bait really is the versatility. It can be fished like a Damiki rig, hung below the boat. You can cast it out and mid-stroll this thing. You can fish it with a big jig head like I have here, bounced along the bottom, slowly swimming and crawling that swim bait, and it can just do a bunch of different things. So for me, a finesse swim bait is just an effective tool that gets a lot of bites from those minnow eaters as that water cools down. So obviously the versatility is really important when you're finesse swim baiting, but you can also use this bait to cover a lot of water with. A lot of these techniques are very slow moving. You basically have to be in the strike zone to trigger fish to go. But with this, you can make a long cast and pretty steadily wind that bait either along bottom or up in the water column and figure out where these fish are located. So as opposed to those other techniques where you have to really know where these fish are located, this bait you can cover some water with and figure out and locate those cold water fish. Kind of expanding upon the versatility of a swim bait is picking the size swim bait head that you're going to use. Now this is a pretty large 5/8 ounce head, and the reason for that is I was crawling this bait down in the rocks in about 27 foot of water. But if you're fishing this bait up in the column, you can go to a lighter size head to match the style of the way that you want to fish this bait. This is the Nishine Lure Works smelt head. Especially for crawling, I've had a lot of success with this head over the past handful of trips, and the reason for that is because it has that really long nose, which actually digs down like a crankbait bill and helps keep your line out of the rocks and also keeps this bait down a little more effectively. But again, there's a bunch of great swim bait heads out there for you guys to check out. And then the swim bait that I have on the back of there is the Beast Coast Slow Flow. This is a 2.85. Has a really, really nice kick even when you crawl this bait as slowly as you can retrieve it. It actually does better at those really slow speeds than it does when you're trying to burn this bait back. Really, the color you want to pick is going to be whatever type of forage that you're fishing around. So those fish seem to be really keyed in on whitebait fish my last trip out, but they have a bunch of green pumpkins, dope gill, which does a really good perch imitation, and just choose the color and choose the size to the size and color of the forage that you're fishing around. The rod that I'm throwing this on is, again, the TFO Professional Series. It's a 7'6" medium. And the reason I go with that medium is because when I'm fishing this bait super slowly along bottom, I want that power and the length in this rod to be able to drive that hook home. Then a 3,000 size spinning reel, 8-pound test braided line to 8-pound test fluorocarbon. And then my final technique for cold water fishing is a jerkbait. And a jerkbait has kind of gotten put away from me for the past couple of seasons, basically because I've been fishing a lot more along the bottom. But when those fish kind of suspend up, you have to pick up a jerkbait, and the reason it is so effective in that cold water is that you can hold this bait in place. You can take this bait fish it down to depth or sink it to depth, and you have a ton of control over getting this bait to suspend or sink to depth and then really kind of hold in the water. The other benefit of a jerk bait is that fish will come up to it. So a lot of fish, especially with those baits I'm talking about, are bottom feeders. They're keying in on this bait as it falls and then eating it along bottom. But there are some fish during the wintertime that just want to feed up. Maybe you're fishing during a pressure system where these fish are feeding and keying up on bait fish, or they're keyed in on shiners or shad up in the water column. A jerk bait is a really effective approach because you can fish it and hold it in place in the middle of the water column. Now the bait I have here is a Jacko Re-Range 110. It's a really good jerk bait, suspends really effectively, but a couple of my other favorites are the Duo Realis 110 SP. It's a suspending model jerk bait. The Berkley Stunna 112 Plus One, which is a deeper diving model, dives down to about 6 to 9 foot of water. But all of them I modify in some way to get them to sink, so I have a lot of control over that bait in the water column. The biggest key for me this time of year is being able to get that bait down about 6 foot of water, get it to sink down, and have control over where that bait is sitting in the water. This is also my only bait caster in the lineup, and the reason for that is because as that water cools down, my spinning rods have those bigger guides. They're not going to ice up quite as bad as compared to my bait casting reel. Now I am fishing this on straight fluorocarbon, which helps a little bit. But when it gets really, really cold, when that water is in the low 40s, upper 30-degree range, and those fish are keying up, you might want to switch this to a spinning rod setup to kind of help you be able to fish this more effectively without your guides icing up every cast. The rod that I'm fishing this on is a TFO Resolve. It's a 7-foot medium. This is my go-to jerk baiting rod. I love this thing. It is so light. You can fish it really effectively all day long without getting fatigued, and it also has a really good action to keep those fish pinned on those smaller treble hooks. So those are my 4 setups. Those are my go-to setups when I'm fishing cold water situations. A blade bait, phenomenal cold water approach. A finesse jig I've started to love over the past couple of seasons. That swim bait has caught me fish for years and years, and a jerk bait is a phenomenal tool to catch fish suspended up and feeding up in the water column. Now if you guys actually want to see me catch some cold water bass, click this video right here. Hit that subscribe button if you're not already, and if you have any questions or comments about any of the baits that I mentioned in today's video, or maybe I missed one of your favorites, let me know down in the comment section down below. I really appreciate all you guys taking the time to watch this video, subscribing to the channel, and growing this community. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Take care, tight lines. God bless. Pursue passion.